The desert don't forget what men do under its sky. It remembers every lie, every prayer, every drop of blood that darkens its dust. I've seen it. The way the land holds on, long after the men are gone. That evening, as the sun bled itself dry across the horizon, a lone rider moved like a ghost through the canyon's breath. His name was Calder Hayes, though he didn't look like a man who owned a name anymore. His coat hung torn, his wrists bound in rawhide. And his eyes, Lord, those eyes, carried the weight of something no gallows could hang from him. The Apache riders circled slow, their ponies kicking up ghosts of dust. The wind was still, the earth waiting. By dusk, they'd bring him to the village, to face judgment for killing a young brave near the border, and the desert watched. It always does. Night fell like a blanket heavy with old grief. The moon rose sharp and silver above the mesas, watching as the tribe gathered in a wide ring of torchlight. Flames licked upward, painting faces in gold and shadow. The smell of smoke mingled with sage and sweat. At the center stood Calder Hayes, unshaven, boots caked in dried clay, wrists bound before him. His breath was ragged, but his spine stayed straight. Not defiance, just a man too tired to beg. Before him stood Chief Toho Redhawk, tall, silent, carved by the years like the very rocks behind him. His hair braided with eagle feather and ash, his gaze steady as stone. Around them, the murmurs rose, old women whispering of vengeance, young men clutching spears. From the shadows, Nayeli Redhawk, the chief's daughter, watched. Her dark hair hung loose, the firelight catching in her eyes like the reflection of something she couldn't quite name. The chief's voice carried through the night, low and deep. You rode our borders, cowboy. You carried a rifle. A boy fell. My son's blood feeds the dirt. The words were steady, but behind them, the tremor of a father's pain. Calder tried to speak, his throat dry as sandpaper. It wasn't me, he rasped. Then who? Came the chief's reply. Calder swallowed, eyes flickering toward the flames. I don't know. I heard shots. I rode toward him. Found the boy already down. Tried to help. His voice broke like drywood snapping. The murmurs grew sharper, disbelief, anger, old grief turned to noise, silence, the chief said, and the crowd obeyed. He turned to the circle of elders, men whose faces were lined like canyon walls. They whispered in their tongue, their eyes never leaving Calder. At last, the chief said, by sunrise, the spirits will decide. He will face judgment when the light returns. A hush fell. Only the crackle of fire filled the air. Calder lifted his head once, toward the sky, where a handful of stars pierced through the smoke. He wished they could speak for him, that somewhere up there, truth could find its voice. But all the desert gave back was silence, deep, endless, ancient. That night, as they tied him to a post beside the fire. Calder's mind drifted back to the day everything turned. He'd been riding through the borderlands, hunting mustangs, trading hides, when the echo of a rifle cracked across the ravine. The sound bounced through the rocks like a ghost scream. He rode toward it. Instinct more than courage. He found a boy, maybe 15, maybe younger, sprawled near the riverbank. Blood bloomed bright against the dust. The boy's hand still clutched a stone knife. Calder leapt from his horse, pressed his coat to the wound, muttering prayers he hadn't said since his mother died. But the boy's eyes were glassing over when the others arrived. Apache riders, their faces a storm of fury. They saw only a white man kneeling over their kin, his hands red, his gun nearby. Calder raised his palms, tried to speak, but their grief drowned him out. Arrows hissed through the air. He barely made it to his horse alive. From that day, the desert hunted him too. Every shadow became a threat. Every sunrise, a reckoning he didn't feel he'd earned. That he stopped sleeping easy. He stopped speaking to men. Sometimes, by the campfire, he'd stare at his reflection in the canteen and whisper to it like a confession. Maybe this is what I deserve. The world had gone quiet on him. He carried guilt like it was stitched into his coat. He wasn't sure if he was running from death or toward it. Now, under a foreign sky, tied before strangers, that same thought settled over him again. Maybe the desert was just finishing what the world had already started. The camp quieted with the stars. Children slept beside their mothers. Guards moved like shadows. Calder sat alone, the fire crackling at his feet. The ropes around his wrists cut deep, but he didn't bother to move. Then, a faint sound of steps behind him. Soft, deliberate, he turned his head just enough to see Nayeli stepping from the dark. She carried a small clay bowl of water and a strip of cloth. Her eyes flicked once to his, then away. She didn't speak. She knelt beside him, setting the bowl near his boots. The firelight caught the scar that traced her cheek, thin as a whisper, old as memory. Calder could see the strength in her hands. The calluses, the quiet grace of someone who'd known work and loss both. He wanted to thank her, but the words stuck in his throat. All that came out was a breath, half gratitude, half shame. You shouldn't, he finally muttered. She dipped the cloth in water, wrung it out, and passed it to him anyway. Water does not care who drinks, she said softly. Her voice, steady, low, carried more mercy than he'd heard in months. Their eyes met for a fleeting heartbeat, and something shifted. A space opened between them. Not trust, not yet, but a recognition of shared weariness. Then she stood, gathering the bowl. The chief will judge you with the morning, she said. He nodded, his throat tight. When she walked away, he watched the sway of her braid catch the firelight. And for the first time since the boy's death, he felt something like stillness inside him. That small act of grace, quiet and wordless, settled in him like a seed waiting for rain. Dawn came red, like the sky itself was angry. The drums began before the sun broke. Low and slow, like a heart heavy with dread. Calder stood again before the tribe, his wrists bound to a wooden post. The air trembled with tension, the smell of smoke thick enough to taste. The chief approached, carrying a cedar staff carved with stories of their ancestors. Wolves, eagles, thunder. His face was unreadable. Around them, the tribe gathered tighter, whispers running through the crowd like dry grass fire. Among them stood Eli Boone, the white trader, face smug beneath his broad hat. He'd brought goods to the Apache for years, trading rifles and lies with equal ease. He leaned toward one of the braves and hissed, "That cowboy's guilty. I saw him near the boy that day." The poison spread quick. Anger flared. Calder's pulse pounded in his neck, but he didn't look up. The chief lifted his staff. This man stands between truth and the spirits. His guilt or innocence will be decided by fire and dawn. A murmur of assent rolled through the tribe. Nayeli stood at the edge, her hands clasped tight. Her heart beat hard enough she thought it might shatter her chest. She knew Boone's words were wrong. She'd seen the tracks that day. 2 sets of boot prints, not one. But her tongue had been silent then, silenced by fear of dishonoring her father. Now that silence burned her from the inside, Calder's voice broke through the air, hoarse but steady. "I told you. I didn't do it." Boone sneered. "Liar. You're just another drifter looking for trouble where you don't belong." The chief raised his staff again, eyes narrowing. The crowd stilled. The moment before verdict felt endless, like the air itself was holding its breath. And then, she stepped forward. Nayeli. Every head turned. The chief's hand froze midair, confusion flickering across his face. His daughter never interfered in council matters. Her fingers trembled, but her feet did not. She said nothing, not yet. But her presence alone cracked the air open, like a storm threatening to break. Calder looked at her, the only face not filled with hate. And for the first time since this all began, he dared to hope. The silence between them stretched, taut, trembling. Then Nayeli spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through every crack of the camp like wind through canyon stone. He did not lie. For words. Soft. Certain. They hit harder than any rifle shot. The murmurs rippled through the crowd. Disbelief first, then confusion. Men looked to one another, unsure if they'd heard right. The fire snapped, sending sparks into the morning air. Calder's head lifted slowly. He looked at her as if he'd just seen light after years of night. The chief's face was carved from sorrow and pride both. "Daughter," he said quietly, "you would speak against your own?" Her eyes glistened but didn't waver. "I would speak for what I saw." The chief's jaw tightened, but the staff lowered. "Then he will not hang today. The spirits will wait another night. We will find the truth." A collective exhale moved through the camp. Boone's smile faltered for the first time. Calder was taken away again, guarded, bound, but alive as the sun climbed higher. Nayeli watched him disappear into the shadow of the cliffs. Her heart thudded with something she didn't yet understand. Part fear, part relief, part something nameless. And in the distance, the desert wind rose again, whispering secrets through the dust. Night fell soft over the camp, the kind of quiet that carries its own heartbeat. The fires had gone low, and the guards had drifted toward the edge of their dreams. Calder sat alone inside a small pen of posts and rawhide, the desert wind moving gently through his hair, carrying with it the faint smell of sage and smoke. His shoulder ached, his throat was dry, and in the silence he could hear the sound of his own breathing, steady, like a man resigned that a rustle broke the stillness. He turned his head and saw her. Nayeli moved like a wisp through shadow, her bare feet silent in the sand. In her hands, a small bowl and a strip of bread wrapped in cloth. She crouched near the fence, her face pale in the moonlight, her braids slipping forward over her shoulder. "You'll be seen," he whispered. "Then I'll walk away before I am," she said. Her voice was calm, low, the kind of tone that could soothe horses. She slid the food through the gap in the post. He took it with both hands, trying to hide the tremble. "You didn't have to." "I know." They sat for a long moment, neither speaking. The fire cracked once somewhere behind them, and the night air stirred the sand into tiny ghosts that vanished just as quick. "Why didn't you run?" she finally asked. "You could have, last night." The guards sleep heavy. Calder tore a piece of bread, chewed slowly, looked at her through the thin lines of moonlight. "Running don't clear a man's soul," he said softly. "If I ran from every wrong I didn't make, it'd still make me the kind who never stayed to make things right." Her eyes lingered on him, something shifting behind them, something uncertain, maybe admiration, maybe pain. "I saw the river that day," she whispered. "The tracks. 2 sets, not one." He froze, bread half to his mouth. "I didn't tell my father," she continued, her words barely sound. "I thought no one would believe me. The others wanted someone to pay. And you were there." Calder looked down at the sand, then up again, his voice rough. "Sometimes the truth's the only thing worth dying for. But I'm grateful you said it anyway." The moonlight washed her face silver. She looked like something sacred, fragile, carved from the same silence that fills the desert before dawn. For a while, they said nothing. Their eyes met through the posts, and a quiet understanding settled between them. Two souls worn down by the same kind of loneliness, each finding a mirror in the other. When she finally stood, he whispered, "Nayeli." She turned slightly, her braid brushing her shoulder. "Thank you." She nodded once, and slipped back into the shadows. The night kept its secrets. But something new had been born between them, unspoken, fragile, and real. The next dawn was not gentle. The air cracked cold, and the first light turned the rocks to gold. Out beyond the edge of camp, a man moved quietly through the scrub, Eli Boone. His boots barely stirred the dirt. He carried a sack heavy with metal and deceit, and his eyes darted like a coyote's. He met another settler near the border ridge, a gaunt man with a wagon half hidden by the brush. "You got the rifles?" the man asked. Boone grinned, showing the yellow of his teeth. "I got him. Same kind that killed that Apache boy. Ain't nobody gonna trace it back now." He pulled a silver revolver from his belt, spinning it once before setting it on the crate. The dawn light caught the engraving along the barrel, the same curling marks Nayeli had seen on her brother's wound. Hidden among the rocks above them, Nayeli crouched low. Her breath came quick and shallow. She'd followed Boone since the first whisper of his movements, something in her bones pushing her forward. She leaned forward, watching as he handed over the gun. Her fingers curled in the dirt. Then a stone slipped beneath her hand, tumbling down the slope with a small clatter. Boone's head shot up. His eyes found her in an instant. "You," he hissed. He fired once, the bullet splintering the rock near her arm. She turned and ran, her braid whipping behind her. The traitor shouted, crashing through brush as he gave chase. She reached her horse, swung herself up, and kicked hard. The wind tore at her face as she rode, the earth rising in waves of dust beneath her. Behind her came Boone's curses, and behind him, the sound of riders, the tribe, awakened and unsure. Arrows slicing through the air toward her back. They thought she was fleeing. Calder heard the noise first, the echo of gunfire, the cries, the hoofbeats. He looked toward the horizon and saw the smoke rising, saw Nayeli's figure cutting across the red plain like a streak of fire. Without thinking, he moved. He twisted the ropes around his wrists until the skin broke, until blood slicked the rawhide enough to slip free. His breath came ragged, but his heart was cleared. He stumbled toward the pen's edge, grabbed a guard's dropped knife, and swung himself onto the nearest horse. Hold on, he muttered to the horizon, and rode. Nayeli reached the ravine first, the same place her brother had died, the place where truth had been buried under dust and rage. Her horse stumbled down the slope, hooves slipping on loose stone. Boone was close behind. She turned just as he raised the revolver. His face was a snarl, the morning light catching the sweat on his brow. You shouldn't have seen that, he spat. She backed toward the edge. You killed him, she said. Boone's grin widened. Kid got in the way. You'd best forget it now. He cocked the gun. Drop it. The voice came from the ridge above, hoarse, strained. Calder Hayes, pale and dusted with blood, his body trembling but his stance unshaken. He held no weapon, only the knife still slick from cutting his ropes. Boone laughed. You again? Should have let him hang you. I don't run, Calder said. Not from truth. Boone turned the gun toward him and fired. The first shot cracked the air like lightning. Nayeli screamed. Calder moved without thought. He stepped between her and the bullet. The sound echoed through the canyon, rolling off the cliffs like thunder. He fell to his knees, clutching his shoulder, the blood blooming dark against his shirt. Boone's face twisted in something like panic as he raised the gun again. But before he could fire, the rumble of hooves filled the air. The Apache riders poured into the ravine like a wave of fury. Chief Toho at their head, his eyes blazing. They saw Boone, the silver revolver smoking in his hand, the cowboy bleeding before him, Nayeli weeping beside. The chief's voice thundered through the canyon. Enough! Boone turned, desperate, firing wildly. An arrow found his chest. He staggered, the revolver falling from his grasp, his eyes wide in disbelief before he collapsed into the dust he'd poisoned. Silence fell, heavy and holy. The chief dismounted, rushing to Nayeli's side. She was cradling Calder's head in her lap, her hands trembling, blood staining her dress. The old man knelt, his voice breaking for the first time. You saved my child. Calder tried to speak, but his voice was a rasp of wind. Just setting things right. The chief's hand pressed to his wound, the fire gone from his eyes, replaced with something ancient and humbled. The tribe gathered, standing in a circle, not of judgment this time, but of reverence. When they carried him back, the ravine stayed quiet behind them. Even the wind seemed to bow. The dawn that followed was soft again, washed clean. Calder opened his eyes to the smell of cedar smoke and herbs. The chief's tent was dim, the air heavy with warmth. His shoulder throbbed, but the pain felt distant, dulled by care. He turned his head and saw Nayeli sitting beside him. Her hands were folded, her braid loose, her eyes wet but calm. You lived, she whispered. I reckon so, he murmured. Didn't figure I'd see another sunrise. You will see many. She smiled faintly. My father says the spirits spared you, that they saw your heart. Calder looked past her to where the chief stood at the tent's entrance, his face lined deep with age and understanding. The old man stepped forward. You could ride free, cowboy. Leave this land behind, as most men would. Or you could stay. We have need for a man who carries truth the way you do. Calder took a slow breath, staring at his hands, the bandages white against the tan. Ain't much left of me out there, he said. Guess I got nowhere else to ride. The chief nodded once, solemnly. Then stay as brother, not prisoner. Nayeli's eyes flicked toward Calder, soft as the morning light filtering through the tent's flap. The corners of her mouth lifted in the faintest smile. Not joy, not love yet, but peace. Outside, children's laughter echoed through the camp. The sound felt strange to him at first, like music he hadn't heard in years. He leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the warmth of the fire touch his skin. For the first time since the boy had died, his soul felt lighter, not cleansed, not perfect, but forgiven. He wasn't sure if it was the desert or the people or just one woman's voice that had saved him. Maybe all of it. Maybe that's how grace worked, coming from everywhere at once. Old Josiah's voice rose again, slow and gravelly, drifting like smoke through the last scene of memory. They said 4 words saved a man, he murmured, his hands folded near the dying fire. But truth is, they saved us all. 'Cause mercy's a river that don't care where it starts, only where it ends. The picture widened, The desert vast and golden, the Apache and the Cowboy side by side, working the land. Children ran between them, laughter chasing dust into sunlight. Calder lifted his head toward the hills, where Nayeli stood, her face turned to the wind. Their eyes met across the distance, wordless, certain. Two souls once broken, now held by the same horizon. The fire cracked softly. The old storyteller smiled to himself, as if remembering something too beautiful to say aloud. And the story closed like dusk itself, slow, golden, eternal.